I now have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Norman Jacknis. Norm is a senior fellow at the New York-based Intelligent Community Forum with special responsibility for the Rural Imperative Program. Dr. Jacknis was most recently director of Cisco's IBSG Public Sector Group and is a globally recognized expert in government innovation and transformation. Government Technology magazine selected him as one of America's top 25 doers, dreamers, and drivers who, using technology, and they quote, broke the bureaucratic inertia to better serve the public. At Cisco, he worked in depth with the National Association of Counties and the U.S. Conference of Mayors in the development of strategy for the economic viability of American cities in 2030. For 10 years, Dr. Jacknis was the CIO for Westchester County, New York. In 2008, under his leadership, the community was ranked as one of the top 7 intelligent communities in the world. That's very impressive. He still lives in Westchester. Dr. Jacknis also served as co-chair of the Technology and Architecture Committee of the New York State CIO Council, and he participated in the Federal State Local Partnership for Intergovernmental Innovation. His writings include articles for elected government representatives, and he also served as an executive in the software industry with emphasis on internet applications and distributed computing. Dr. Jacknis received his doctorate, master's, and bachelor's degrees from Princeton University, and he is a current member of the New York State Regents Advisory Council on Libraries and president of the New York Metropolitan Library Council. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jacknis.
Good morning, everybody. Glad to see you here. I'm going to try to sort of set the agenda, if you will, to some extent. This will start with what we're calling a new connected countryside, a rural imperative. First, the Intelligent Community Forum, just to give you a little background as to sort of why I'm here, what this is all about. The Intelligent Community Forum was actually set up more than 15 years ago, before a lot of us were thinking about the role of the internet and technology. It's a worldwide group consisting of people who actually started to plan how to do community development using this kind of technology. There are more than currently active 125 communities around the world, and you might notice, it's a little bit hard to get on this map, most of them, not all, but most of them are urban. And that struck us as being strange because if you think about it, this kind of technology can have much greater impact, demonstrate a much greater impact in rural areas than in urban areas. And so that's one of the reasons why we set up this rural imperative recently. And what I'm going to present is based in part on what we've learned from all these communities, as well as what we've learned individually over the course of our own careers doing these kinds of things. You may be most familiar with ICF from this. It starts out with 21 semi-finalists that are chosen at the beginning of the year, leading to the top 7 who are presented at the annual summit where the number 1 community in the world is announced. That's in June. ICF, however, also runs a variety of workshops for people interested in how to do these things, and various books and so forth. Okay, first I want to deal with some of the long-term trends, just to deal with some of the, I think, minor issues that come up. One, clearly there's more than one way to get from point A to point B physically. The same is true in terms of broadband. We think of fiber. Everybody wants to have fiber, and it's great, and obviously it gives you tremendous capacity. It can be very expensive to deploy fiber in every little country road, however. So there are other alternatives. You clearly know, probably, in rural communities about satellite array, although that isn't necessarily the best approach. There's Wi-Fi, which you can deploy in towns. Fixed wireless, which you're beginning to see more of. And then I'm going to show you some newer things. That's free space optics, same idea, if you will, as fiber, but instead of using the fiberglass that goes through the air, that kind of thing I think can generate or cover 30 gigabits. I mean, it's fairly substantial. Good way to reach difficult places. white space, or countries, nations around the world are beginning, as they convert from analog to digital television, to free up some spectrum that it's called white space that can be used. And this is one of my favorites, which we actually deployed when I was in Westchester and played with. These are balloons. They're actually called heliostats because they're actually a combination of a balloon and a plane, if you will, so that they can deal with winds. But you can, if you will, erect an instant 500-foot tower, or actually 485-foot tower, just below what the aviation requires you not to interfere with, and that can provide coverage for a long ways. So some combination of these things can help cover a lot of the area, and I'm even talking about some of the dreams that the founders of Google and Facebook have for very high orbiting kinds of devices. I used to think, by the way, that wireless had limited limits, and in fact there are natural physical limits to how much you can pump through wireless connections, but I've been absolutely amazed at the engineers' ability to really ramp up the speeds that they can get through the air. Okay, so that's part of this. Other important trend, and this is very relevant to our topic, I mean, there are lots of other trends I could talk about, this is important, and high quality visual communications. I want to point out to you, everybody thinks that have so matured in the state of development of the internet. We haven't, we're in the early days. If you think about it, it's almost like where the telephone system was in the 1920s, which was, after all, 50 years after the telephone was invented, but still, think about what we have now compared to then. They were really in the primitive stages. We are in the primitive stages now, partly because we still don't have this yet, but it's coming. And the reason it's important, and I'm not going to read all this, a little aside about this, by the way, I'm going to leave a copy of this as a PDF for those of you who want to read the details. I'm not going to read all these slides, so if you're interested in some of the research, some of the details, you'll be able to read it by yourself. In any event, the classic phrase that summarizes as seeing is believing, and that only 7% of what people communicate in text is what's being actually communicated. And so the visual aspect of communication is very important. This is not satisfied currently by email or texting or most of the other ways that people communicate on the internet. But with broadband, you can begin to do this. And as I said, we've already begun to see this. So corporations have been using a lot of video conferencing, a very high quality immersive video conferencing as it's called. There's Hangouts from Google that have been used a lot. There's FaceTime that Apple's been offering. Skype. I love this picture. One of the things that's driving the increase in the use of the internet by seniors is the desire to be able to communicate to the grandkids. Right? And even this is in the early stages. We're just beginning to get a sense as to what the future of visual communications over broadband might look like. And I'll give you sort of an example. There was France, they had a couple of years ago, they had a big television event, their annual equivalent of the Grammy Awards, as they're called in Hollywood. And they had this musical group called Black Eyed Peas. It was one of their major events, it's one of their major bands. Of the 4 lead singers, only 2, unfortunately, were able to get there. So what do you do about that? So I apologize that the lip syncing is worse than you usually see on television, but whatever. In any event, 2 of those people weren't there. They were delivered by holographic-like telepresence over the internet. I'm not going to ask you to guess which of those 2 are. You'll see now. One of them should be obvious. The other will be a surprise. So we're just at the beginning, and this has been used in various events. I was at the South by Southwest Festival in Austin a few weeks ago, and they had a pianist, actually a Jacknis classical pianist, playing against himself and this kind of thing. You're beginning to see this. It's still not widespread, but it will be. Not today, certainly by 2030, maybe even by 2020, you will have a world where you have easy visual communications, which really does change the game. Because it allows people to do the kind of thing that we're doing now. And one point here, people ask me, okay, that's fine, 2030, who cares? Well, why talk of the future? First of all, I have to bring a classic line from Wayne Gretzky, right? You play where the puck's going to be, not where it is now. I think for people involved with community development and public projects, this is even more important because we all know how long it takes to get things done. You don't want to put that whole investment in and try to plan for that to get done. And then when you finally sort of, if you will, open the doors to your new project, it turns out it's obsolete on day one. You want to make sure that you meet the demand that will exist when this thing finally gets to come to fruition. Okay, long-term trends in the economy, and this is the other part of this picture, is what's happening with the economy. So, first of all, how do we get where we are today? I think it's important to understand if you're thinking about development and sort of what's happened to the countryside versus the urban areas. What leads to economic growth? Now, there are a lot of things, and there are a lot of social institutional foundations for growth. What I'm talking about here is once you have those, particularly in developed countries, what advances? This is classic economics. It's specialization and its creation of new knowledge that depend upon communications and collaboration among people, right? In the 20th century, in the latter half of the 19th, proximity was the way this happened. You put lots of people closely together in urban areas, and it led to this kind of feedback cycle where they created larger markets for each other, they gave new ideas, people specialized. I heard a story in Silicon Valley, for example, that there were 4 people out of the millions who lived there who understood how to do clean rooms in semiconductor factories, and they basically went from one company to another doing this. And you could do that if you have those millions of people there, right? It's kind of a modern example of the same sort of principles. And this worked real well. And so these are the old economy rules, and this is something that I think, for those of you who are in economic development, you're quite familiar with, and think that most of them are still true. Economic activity was tied to a particular building. Big companies would concentrate employment, and one of the things government therefore did was to try to give incentives for companies to move to my area, called economic hunting, if you will. Markets were local. People understand that's not quite as true anymore, but they do still have this vision of clusters physically together. And the latter point is on the bottom. It's not so much relevant to North America, but you see the quality of life traded off for economic development in places like China. And public officials, although they don't want to have the pollution and all the rest of it, they are willing to say, well, you people went through that same thing. It seems to be a necessary part of economic development. Old rules. The clusters. This is a very important thing, and I'm emphasizing it a little bit because it's relevant to the urban versus rural economic development debate, if you will. This was very much a part of urban development. You needed to cluster together to build some of these industries, and different cities would specialize in different things. I love this picture. It goes back to 1922 in Hollywood. Think about that. This is before there was sound in pictures. This is before there was color. This is before movies were the mass cultural institution they became 10, 20, 30 years later. And they felt the need, nevertheless, to cluster together. Things are changing, however, and this is one of the ways that there are economic opportunities opening up for rural areas. Because, again, if you think about it, the clustering effect is something that it will be done better in urban areas if it's required. But it's less and less so. So Professor Paul Krugman of Princeton, who won the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago for his work on what was called the New Economic Geography, which was one of the intellectual foundations for the cluster approach, said to the Nobel Prize givers, thank you very much. Unfortunately, it used to be true, but it's less so now. And in fact, if you think about even Silicon Valley, people talk about, it has nowhere near the economic concentration and impact that even a place like Akron, Ohio had in the rubber industry, just to give one example of many. There are other studies. This one was done of 300,000 businesses in Pennsylvania. And basically, it says industry cluster theory has an inability to explain economic dispersion and the presence of high-growing firms. Outside of North America and Norway, same thing. Clustering does not generate this kind of innovation that people expect it would. It's not surprising. We live in a global economy. Physical clustering shouldn't play the same role that it did in the past. And this is one of the reasons why there's a chance now for rural communities to play a role in that global economy. because they don't have to be in those physical places. One of my favorites, this is Wall Street is one of the world famous clusters, right? And this is from the old Frank Sinatra song, "If I can make it in New York, I'll make it anywhere." That's almost been turned on its head. Those of you who are familiar with New York actually know that the financial firms that are in New York actually are not clustered around Wall Street any longer. But putting that aside, they've also, New York Stock Exchange has lost a substantial amount of market share to other companies, including ones that are not based in New York. One example that's one of my favorites is the BATS Exchange, which is actually headquartered in a town that's about 14 miles outside of Kansas City, Kansas, which nobody had ever thought of as being a center of high finance. Nevertheless, I think they have something like 10% market share. And the market share, if you will, of the New York Wall Street has gone down. And so then after that story, about a year later came this. Stock Exchange is betting on its space as a party space. So, what do you do when a cathedral capitalism becomes antiquated? You turn into New York's best party space. I've actually gone to parties there. It's really cool. But it's sort of a joke. On the other hand, this actually begins to tell you about the transitioning of cities from centers of economic production to centers of consumption and entertainment. In any event, this is where it stands. So the other trend that's important that feeds into this is a lot more people are not making physical goods. They're making a living through the delivery of services and digital goods, which are easily transportable over the internet. This is in the USA. Just this 100-year transition from the year 1900 to 2000 is absolutely amazing. Year 1900, 71% of the workforce was making goods or food. It went down to, 21% 100 years later. Same thing is true in Europe and in other industrialized economies. In the industrial era, you have these wonderful pictures of thousands of people showing up to these factories, right? Doesn't happen anymore. But in the service economy, so a lot of mayors around the world thought, well, okay, we're going to have the same kind of thing. We'll concentrate the service jobs in office towers. And we have these gleaming skylines. I mean, there's even a picture there of a town that's got 50,000 people in it with skyscrapers. Where'd they go? Where'd the workers go? The reality is that this has been dramatically affected by technological trends. So it used to be that in an office building you'd assume 200 square feet per employee. That's now down to 50 square feet per employee. One of the other statistics I love is that 40% of IBM's employees worldwide don't actually go to a place that has IBM's label on the door. They're working on the road, at home, at customer sites, but not in the traditional office. Okay, so where are we headed with all of this? What trends are we seeing? First of all, big companies are no longer the source of jobs. And they also have a global presence. They themselves are taking advantage of this technology. This is a great picture from Nestle. This is how they describe where they're located, what they are. They're actually a Swiss company, I believe, but you couldn't tell from the way they describe themselves. Oops, I'm sorry, I'll go back. There's an important point to those of you who sort of academics. The bottom point, Ronald Coase won the Nobel Prize in economics several years ago for the theory of the firm. And basically his research was about why did big industrial firms develop and why didn't people just use the marketplace for everything? And he said, well, there are transaction costs to trying to get all the services you need in the marketplace. So we build these big organizations because it makes it easier to people to collaborate and get what they need in order to do the work that they have to get done. Important point. More recently, you have Clay Shirky's book, Here Comes Everybody, about the way the internet does this. And the reality is that today, the internet and the collaboration tools that are available through that kind of technology provide a substitute for the organization glue, the collaboration glue that major corporations used to provide. So you can get things like the Linux system and Wikipedia and a variety of other kinds of things. Even manufacturing, by the way, a little side point, is becoming decentralized to some extent through 3D printing. So thinking about it, the key unit of economic activity in some respects is moving over to the individual with more flexible teams. And the way I describe it is, it used to be, the old style, you had one CEO for 50,000 or more employees, and now you've got much smaller teams and much more fluid teams. This should be a part of your thinking and what becomes feasible in rural areas. Future economy rules. The connected home is now a place where people work and shop, right? You don't actually have to do all your work in the office or the factory. It's an economic gardening approach, if some respect. You build up what you have. You build up what you have, as opposed to trying to bag somebody else to come in and create jobs. Business clusters virtually. People still need to get support from each other, but they don't have to do it physically. Markets are global. Quality of life becomes an important part of economic competitiveness for communities. Now, I'm not saying the laws of economics change, specialization, all that stuff still counts, but physical proximity is no longer the only way people can get together, and that's an important point here. So, the way I describe it describes to cities as well as rural areas. The key question for economic strategy is when most people can work anywhere, where will they choose to live and work? And this is an important way you should start thinking about what your community and economic development are and how they're tied together. Okay, why do we need a rural imperative? Right? This is why is the ICF involved with this to begin with? Partly during industrialization, rural areas seem to have lost out, right? I mean, people emptied out of the countryside and went to cities. And you have the UN still talking about this. This is a very misleading statement, by the way. Most of this has to do with previously non-industrialized countries industrializing now, like China and India. There's not this massive movement out of the countryside, to this level in more developed countries. But nevertheless, this is sort of the way people are thinking now. And the reasons for it are you've got scale, you can get a lot of things done, concentrate money, right? You have proximity, as I said before in the past, and you have excitement, right? So all these things are sort of what draws people to cities. But the game is new. The game starts over again because of the technology. And as the second point says, there's an opportunity to eliminate the feeling of being in the middle of nowhere and overcoming that sense of isolation if you're connected. And we are convinced at ICF that rural communities, the countryside, can be a dynamic place, an exciting place where a lot of people will want to live at least part of the year, if not all the year. Okay, I can also give you some examples, and we'll go over if anybody's interested in following up on this. Some of the intelligent communities that ICF already knows about that are in rural areas are beginning to do this. In fact, we work with Minnesota's Intelligent Rural Communities Project. There's Green Hectares, which I believe is in Alberta. Digital Walla Walla, Washington. There's some proof of greater employment in Bristol, Virginia, which is a fairly small town, and in Mitchell, South Dakota, which built up its ability to provide technological services to the rest of the world. And it's already paid off in various ways. This is from a service called Daily Yonder about in the U.S. The impact of those places that had broadband versus those that didn't. Those are rural places, and you can see there's a definite impact here. But this is one of the things that we've learned over the years, over the last 15 years. Broadband alone is not sufficient. You can, if somebody is generous to you and lays the broadband and that's all that happens, it's not going to be used to its full potential. These have to be intertwined with community development, with the applications that make the broadband useful for people, as opposed to just laying fiber in the ground. And so what I'm going to do is show you some examples of what this can do, what it makes possible, and the kinds of things you need to be driving along with whatever broadband projects you might have. So, first, platform for lifelong learning. And I'm talking about adult learning here. There's a lot of emphasis on teaching the kids, but we live in an age now where everybody has to continue to learn, where jobs, where skills that you need to make a living change every few years all over the world. And fortunately for us, there are all kinds of opportunities. So you've got things like edX, which it's got some major universities behind it, and you can actually even not just take the course online, but you can actually get a certificate that says, Harvard says you studied the advanced anthropology online. Okay. Coursera, which is worldwide, has all sorts of stuff. Another example. There's a University of Third Age, which you may not have heard of. It's mostly active in the UK and in Australia. But again, the idea is it takes seniors and let them teach other seniors what they've learned over a lifetime, both online and in classes. And then there are places that don't even call themselves universities, that are all over the internet. Now, these are just some examples. I mean, there's almost nothing that you can't learn somehow or other on the internet. In fact, it's too much. And so one of the things that I've done with various cities is to encourage them to use their public libraries. I mean, librarians are trained to deal with masses of information and help you find what you need. So sort of encourage them to be able, for people to go into the library and say, okay, I need to understand something about chemical engineering. Where do I need to go on the internet to figure out what's appropriate for me given my needs? It's been very successful. There's a 24-hour-a-day virtual reference librarian service that's operating in a variety of places over North America. And Chattanooga, Tennessee, which actually does have broadband all over the metropolitan region, including into rural areas, has done this with the Fourth Floor Library. They've actually turned it over as an entrepreneurial space. So this has been quite successful. This, in a sense, the library becomes the corporate librarian for people who don't have corporations that are big enough to have corporate librarians. Next, connecting residents to global economic opportunities and services.
Nestled in the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains, Tensleep, Wyoming has attracted ranchers and travelers since the late 1800s. Today, they are attracting a new kind of visitor brought by the internet and a young startup company, Elution Technology.
It is such an exciting company.
Elution Technology is focused on changing the way people learn English in Asia.
This is one of the key reasons we're here in Tensleep, in these small communities right here in the Bighorn Basin. The network here, TCT or TriTel, has a very robust telecommunications network, which allows us actually to do this business. And so with their network here in the basin, whether it be Tensleep or Hyattville or Otto or Burlington, this whole basin is wired with high bandwidth fiber optic.
That's a good deal. Yeah, good deal means it's silo, it's cheap, you can get it, and it's affordable. $15. Oh, that's a good deal.
I'm recruitment and training manager for Elution Technology. I have 14 years experience in the public school systems. I am here in Tensleep because I have a husband that is a rancher. I went to Kent and I said, I will work 1 day a week for you. I did that first one and came back and said, oh my gosh, this is heaven. And I said, I don't know how much more you need, but I'll be happy to do.
From our projections, we're looking to go from about 100 teachers, where we are right now, to hopefully about 1,500 by the end of 2008.
They're very successful. They're actually teaching tens of thousands of students all over Asia out of these little towns in Wyoming. And they've grown actually beyond what he was even predicting, and took over a Chinese firm that had specialized in teaching English to Chinese students. So clearly you can do this kind of thing, right? One of the things I want to point out, though, is that a lot of times when people talk about economic development in rural areas with broadband, they think of programmers and technologically based things of this kind. And yeah, that's important, because that's a growing part of the economy. But remember, it's not just the high-tech stuff, but even the low-tech stuff that can benefit from this. And so I love some of the stories that were put up by the Rural Broadband Project in Nova Scotia, because they emphasize more sort of people who are doing regular low-tech businesses. Here's one, D&K bait bags. This is a wonderful little story. Listen to this one.
My name is Deborah Sampson. Our business is called D&K Bait Bags. What we do is we make bait bags for the lobster and crab fishermen. My husband, Kenneth, taught me how to do this, and my late father taught me how to do this, and I just love it. I could sit here for hours and just make bags. We do them as our forefathers have done them. We have high speed. The connection, the speed, everything is fantastic. We are currently having a website being built, so we'll be doing it via internet. Anything you want changed in here, or is that, are you content with that?
Very good, very good.
Okay. And the way we have the lettering, you want the lettering done differently, or,
No, looks all right.
yeah? So you're okay with this?
Yeah, I'm all right with that, yeah.
Yeah.
Looks good.
Okay. It'll do fantastic for our business, because we'll be able to lay out our products, lay out how it's made, you'll be able to see it up close, and you'll be able to order it. And we can just work around the the house and the garage and all that, where we do our business, and just sell it and send it back and forth. My long-term goal is to continue to grow, to be able to sell everywhere, to be able to hire as many people as I can, put people to work to help the people, get me, my husband working full-time at the business, and being able to help the communities.
And they did succeed. And one of the little side stories about this has to do with the global internet. In addition to selling bait bags to lobstermen and in other places, a woman who had a store on Madison Avenue in New York saw this, and she said, "Those would make delightful little handbags for my young, fashionable customers." And so she ended up buying several hundred of these a year for the store in Madison Avenue. By the way, not the only one. Another one, the story they have up there, is from a hammock company that also ended up selling their wares in a major metropolitan area where there were a lot more customers than where they were. So I think it's important to do this. And by the way, there's another little message here in terms of the broadband efforts you have here. I think Nova Scotia was very successful in getting the message across, not only to the rest of the world, but to their own community about how you can use this stuff, and that you don't need to be a software programmer in order to get benefit from the broadband. Business support services also become accessible around the world. That's one of the things, a little dirty secret, if you will, of Silicon Valley is not the engineers, but the lawyers who understand patent law and the financiers who understand how to look at a spreadsheet for a software company and all that sort of stuff. Well, that can now be more widely dispersed. The old joke from the New Yorker cartoon was, on the internet, nobody knows your dog. Well, obviously that wasn't true. This picture was taken by one of my former colleagues in India, and it was basically an outsourced center in India. And so what is true is, on the internet, nobody knows that you're providing business services out of a shack. And there are all kinds of organizations helping. This is one of them called Startup Nomads that provides services for people around the world. There are all kinds of places that do this sort of thing. The flow of capital has now become much more global, and there's been much more creative use of capital with things like Kickstarter and crowdfunding and all the rest of it. And this too means that your entrepreneurs can have access to money they didn't have before. Research at great universities. Now, you've got a very good university here. Even if you had Harvard University or Oxford University here, that wouldn't be enough. There's no single university that dominates everything. Fortunately for all of us, from an economic development point of view, most of the research that's ready for commercialization is out there. There's very little of it that's sort of still secret. I mean, there's a lot of work that's being going on that's not ready for commercialization, that's not quite yet been published. But I would certainly encourage our entrepreneurs to start being in that flow of new ideas so that they can take advantage of this, and they'll figure out how to commercialize it. Connecting people to open innovation is another part of it, another set of opportunities. So there's this whole movement of open innovation because innovation is very critical. Everybody knows in this knowledge economy that you stay ahead of the game by being innovative and creating new knowledge. How does it happen? Well, some of my favorite sort of quotes about this. It's a collaborative act. The author, Stephen Johnson, has put it, this is how innovation happens. Chance favors the connected mind. So if you're in that stream of new ideas and think, but here and here and here, you can put new things together. Einstein had a little bit more John's view. The secret to creativity is knowing how to hide your sources. And it gets even worse with, I get my best ideas by looking at other people's laptops in airports. But this is a recognition of the reality of how people are innovative. The idea of some genius sitting somewhere off alone without any contact with the rest of the world is just not true. And so companies realize this, and one of the great leaders of this is Procter & Gamble, big consumer products company, and they said, we have 7,500 of the best scientists in the world, but there are another 1.5 million who can contribute. And so they found a way to bring them into the process, and so more than half of their products come from outsiders, including the very successful Swiffer. There are all kinds of opportunities in various kinds. One, actually, I think the Global Search, the Gold Corp was in Ontario. One of the early success stories of this on the internet, Netflix, all kinds of things going on like this. I can't even list them all. In fact, there's a weekly bulletin that comes out from the Initiative folks about various dozens of companies and organizations that are putting out challenges and will give you cash prizes if you come up with ideas for them. And there are all kinds of other places to do the same sort of thing. Idea Connection, Innovative Hub. Important to understand that innovation is important, but it needs to be supported culturally. And this is a very important statement from Thomas Edison. I have not failed. I just have 10,000 things that do not work. I think there has to be an encouragement, or not encouragement, but an acceptance of failure for innovation to occur and experimentation. Okay, next, access to world-class healthcare. This has been one of the things that's been a big problem in rural areas. Fortunately, you can now do something about it. This was done in Vermont in rural areas. It's a project called the Vermont Telecare Project, and it was really aimed at seniors. I don't know how many of you know this, but the major reason why seniors end up in hospitals is because of falls. And so what they try to do is to give them exercise classes that would improve their balance using Tai Chi. But winters are rough here, they're rough in Vermont. A lot of people don't drive, so they use the network to pull together a virtual Tai Chi class. There's all kinds of health maintenance for chronic diseases now that can be measured daily, so that medical personnel somewhere far away can be tracking whether or not you've got an unusual situation with your insulin or your heartbeat or whatever it might be. Remote diagnosis. Somebody can look at your medical signs remotely. So it could be the world's best diagnostician who's thousands of miles away. Now you have that opportunity. Remote consultation, this from my former company Cisco, was used especially in Scotland, where the government delivers healthcare services, and the big issue for them were all the offshore oil platforms in the North Sea. Very hard to get to, the weather's bad, so they had this device. If somebody was sick, they basically could provide telemedicine for a lot of the problems that were there, and then if somebody needed something significant done, they could move them off, but most of the healthcare was done through these kind of devices. Robotic surgery has been one of the new things coming on, partly because surgeons recognize their fingers are great, their dexterity is great, but their fingers are kind of fat. With robotic surgery, they can make much smaller incisions. And then the military folks realized, well, gee, this person's sitting over here to the left of the surgeon, the patient's over here, but there's no reason why they necessarily need to be in the same room. And this robotic surgery can become remote surgery. So you should have the right-hand side somewhere else, and you've got the best surgeon in the world on the left. Right? Okay, enabling tourists and residents to see the world anew. This particular example I brought up here because I think it relates locally, and I was just curious. I wanted to throw out a challenge to you, if you will. So I came across doing some research about this and found the Ontario Augmented Reality Network. I don't know if you're familiar with augmented reality. It's used in the Royal Ontario Museum, where you can hold up a device. It sees what it is and recognizes it and will give you further information about it if you want it. People use this in museums. They'll even go around cities and take their phones and go like this and say, okay, where are all the restaurants nearby that you can see? Things like that. It's just beginning to happen. You'll be seeing more of it. It does have application, though, outside of cities. So, for example, in Spain, they came up with this fantastic picture of how technology could be used on the farm. One part of it has to do with augmented reality. A Danish technology company called Agrotech, I believe, actually decided to implement one of these things, and you can see. As he's looking, he's seeing what's in these different. Basically, just looking around the farm to see the status of various things. that's part of the future. Now, it's a small company in Denmark. One of the challenges I guess I'll throw out to you is to find some of those folks elsewhere in Ontario who are doing augmented reality and help them bring some of those technologies to the rural communities around here. Okay, key principles and themes, just to sum up. I want to leave a lot of time for questions and discussion, so I'm sort of keeping it relatively short. Key principles. Being visionary about your community. I mean, clearly the broadband internet opens up new possibilities and really does change the game and allows rural communities to, if you will, be competitive in the 21st century's economic conditions, even though they had a tough time in the 20th century's economic conditions. But broadband alone, technology alone, is not going to be it. You need to actually have a community vision. That's one of the things we've learned at ICF from our communities that have been successful. You really need to have a community vision. The leadership has to understand how to marry that technology with a community vision and think about all the various applications that will make life better, improve that quality of life locally. And that will in turn generate the sort of economic activity that people need to make a living, which will be a different kind of way to make a living than they used to. And the other thing I'd say is that one, I'm not in much detail about this, but one of the things that the internet also allows people to do is to participate in that building of community vision. And to do it on a continual basis, almost asynchronously. And that's important so that everybody's on board with where you're going and can be and can help actually participate in making it a success. Okay. Final point, I talked about the future. A lot of things that are sort of not quite here yet will be. The transition won't be simple. This picture sort of tells you, as you get from one condition to another, you got to be careful not to fall in the water, right? And I think, but it's important to plan for the future, the way things will be. I think it's also important that you provide a quality experience, what it means. Not everybody wants the same kind of experience. Some people love being in the center of large cities, others don't. So you want to be able to make sure that whatever it is that you're providing is a quality experience and what's unique about your area. Building a combination of your physical environment, your location, the community, the people, its history. There's a whole combination of things that will allow you to develop a unique competitive edge. And every community leader, every citizen needs to start addressing these issues. Because not making a decision about addressing these, just sort of saying, well, I'll wait until I figure it all out, is also making a decision, and unfortunately it's making a decision that's going to lead to failure. So with that, I want to thank you very much for paying attention. Hopefully some of this has been informative, giving you some sort of new eye-opening about the possibilities for rural development. And I'd be happy to encourage discussion and questions. Thank you.
Questions? Jeff has a microphone.
I think that you've alluded to some issues that need a little more reflection and depth in terms of how they're going to actually work in rural communities. And the issue is the blend of the technology and the face-to-face. That just, as you mentioned in several places where just having the technology available or knowing that the technology is out there somewhere isn't a sufficient condition. And there's quite a body of research on online education where the statistics has been relatively unchanged over a long period of time, that about 60% to 2/3 of people say their online courses supplement but don't replace their in-class face-to-face learning. That's just one example, and many other examples where it's that blend of face-to-face, building social capital, building relationships. It's about the lunch breaks in your online learning that give you the things. And I'm just wondering if you could comment something on where's the research going and where's that happy medium between all online and all face-to-face, and what is the balance that we need in social interaction as well as technology?
First of all, I think as I mentioned, we're not in a situation currently where we can be all online, because all online essentially means text and very limited interaction, and the software isn't there yet to simulate the serendipity of chance meetings. It could be, but it's not there now. These are some of the things that need to be developed as the internet matures. And then it will become a better substitute for the physical face-to-face stuff that we've been having. So as we stand today, you need to have that mix, you're right. But that's changing. And I think as it changes, you'll be able to find somebody who's living in the countryside outside of Kingston to be able to communicate to somebody who's living in Sydney, Australia, right? And be able to see and do almost everything they might do. And that conversation with somebody in Sydney may be very important to them for their specialized interest. We're in this. I said we're in this transition stage. You're absolutely right today about this. In terms of online courses in particular, you're right. People want to have that combination. But I think also, I've heard recently about statistics about the dropout rate in online courses. And I think it's important to understand what the motivations might be for people to take these courses. One of the studies pointed out that a lot of the people taking online courses already had their college degrees. And this gets back to the lifelong learning thing I was talking about. The online course becomes not so much a substitute for the traditional four-year college, but as a way for people who are out of the institutional educational environment to keep up their skills. And so it doesn't surprise me in the least that they may stop before the end of it because they only need to know so much, and that's what they want, and they've gotten it, and that's the end of it. They don't need to have a certificate. They already have a very good certificate. So I think it's as we think about these things, we need to be able to shift our thinking as well and look very closely at how people are using these new technologies.
My question is about content versus technology. I used to have a lot of clients in Ottawa, and I would say to them when new technologies came in, you really are selling Johnny Cash. And if I don't like Johnny Cash on LP, why would I like him in 3D, on CD, DVD, or HD? I just don't like Johnny Cash. So can you comment on the application of new technologies versus the content or the imperative that a rural community would have to transmit some content to the rest of the world? Because it's my feeling that we have kind of a blind faith in technology. It's really wonderful stuff, but it is, after all, changing all the time, and it's just a technological tool to express something. So we need to have the expression identified before we just necessarily implement the technology. So can you comment on that struggle within the rural context?
Yes. You're absolutely right, and I think that's part of the point I was trying to make before in some of the applications, and I mean I can go with others, but let's just talk directly about content. So one of the phenomena you see on the internet is what's called prosumer, that a very large number of people are not just consumers of content, but also producers. And because it's fairly easy to do something and then put it on the internet. And there are a variety of ways in which this can happen. So one of the things in a rural area, and I actually sort of dealt with this a little bit in the rural areas in the U.S. state of Missouri, they had a situation in the Ozarks Mountains where people come in for 2 months during the year during summer vacation, and they'd have this fantastic tourist season, and then for the other 10 months of the year, people would go on welfare. And we pointed out, why can't you bring, if you will, the Ozarks to your customers during those 10 months? By taking local craftsmen and letting them show what they're doing and teach people, if you will, about what they've been taught by their fathers and grandfathers, and also offering it for sale. Or if there's a music festival locally that people are just doing for themselves, there's absolutely no reason why that shouldn't be available on the internet so that people elsewhere can see it. You may find that there's great interest in some local musical variety that's been developed in your particular rural region. So there is an opportunity. I think it's a part of what I was saying before about having a community vision and really thinking about the full range of things that make for people's lives to be interesting and exciting in a place, and then making them available through the internet. It's You're absolutely right about the content. But that can be encouraged, and there's all kinds of stuff going on. I mean, there's people writing poetry here, right? You know, it's, why shouldn't that be made available to more than the 2 people that they might tell it to locally?
Jeff?
I could belt it out, I guess. Yeah, thank you for your talk. That's it's really very exciting. So what I see happening is you're giving them a platform, and this technology is critical. But what about that innovation pedagogy? What's going on to help people generate these ideas, to start thinking about? You know, I look at this, I get really excited about the bake bag and think, oh man, bake bag's been already done. I'm talking about the online Ozark Musical Festival, it's already done. Where are these, how are we generating these new ideas?
I think, first of all, I think most people, whether they've suppressed it or not, have actually reasonably creative capabilities. But what's different is that it's hard to, if you will, prime the pump if they're not exposed to a whole variety of ideas. I think this is one of the things that the internet does for somebody who's particularly living in what they consider to be an isolated area, that now through the internet they can be exposed as much as anybody sitting in the middle of Manhattan can be exposed to this flow of new ideas and saying, that person's using a banjo that way. And that person is growing plants on a rooftop. That gives me an idea. And yeah, things have been done. I suppose you can argue that there's nothing new under the sun, right? The old line. The reality is that even the music festival kind of thing, I mean, hasn't been done enough that people, if the audience of the 6 billion people in the world is overwhelmed by it quite yet. It's not saturation, so there's still an opportunity to do that sort of thing. And you may decide in your particular case that it's going to be a music and video festival together, or it's going to be something where you play music out on the water. I mean, whatever it is, I don't know. You know, this is where the local creativity, where your own folks can come up with ideas. But I think what drives that is having them exposed to all sorts of new things elsewhere and new ideas. Then they themselves will begin to get into the, if you will, the mode of thinking creatively and come up with stuff. It's important for them to be part of the stream. By the way, I left out a slide on this I normally include. This includes older people. There's an economist named Galenson who came out with this wonderful book several years ago about creativity, and he said basically there are 2 kinds of creativity. There's this sort of great insight, the Picasso or Einstein kind of thing that we all think about. But more often than not, the creativity actually is based on lifelong experience, on experimentation, on being exposed to a lot more stuff than a 20-year-old will have been exposed to. And if you look at some of the great artists, they got better and better. Their work was worth more and more as time went on. But what do we do to people in our society as they get out of school? They get further and further away from the flow of new ideas. So whatever natural creative instincts they have, an opportunity for creativity there might exist, is diminished because they're not part of that stream of new ideas. And again, I think one of the things the internet can do, if it's used properly, is to keep them in that stream so they actually can take advantage of that life experience and come up with the kind of creative ideas that they have the potential to do.
I'm wondering if you could comment on the distinct roles of government and the private sector in this transition to the new economy. Who's driving the bus here?
Both have to, right? I mean, that's the obvious answer. The foundation for an economy is normally the government's responsibility. The investment in public goods, traditionally highways, but other kinds of goods and services that individual companies aren't able to make a profit on, but the public nevertheless needs. It's the responsibility of government. And then you have to have the private companies that are willing to do this sort of thing. They have to see the opportunity. I mean, not all entrepreneurs are necessarily terribly innovative. So they need to do that. I mentioned economic gardening. There's this whole group called the Economic Gardening Movement. It's actually started in Colorado in the U.S., but they're all over North America now. And they actually go out and train high-growth small companies that particularly want to not just sort of maintain a very small existence, but really want to grow fast. And they help them do this sort of stuff. So, and that's something that is sponsored, if you will, by the government, but in conjunction, obviously, with the private companies that have to do the work.
last question.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, my question is, which kind of paradigms do you think the public sector need to be changed in order to expand or trigger innovation? Which kind of ideas, the traditional ideas into the public sector need to be changed for expanding?
You know, I only have 45 minutes. So one of the things I talk about, the public sector leaders in particular, is that the government itself can be an example of innovation. And this is very hard to think about. And government is supposedly risk averse. But one example I will point out, the most successful politician in American history was Franklin Roosevelt. The only person to be elected 4 times. Whether people agree with his policies or not, sort of irrelevant, but he was the most successful politically. He wasn't punished when he started out by saying that most of all what he believed in was experimentation and that they would fail sometimes. And he just told people at the beginning, this is what's going to happen. We are going to be an example of this because the economy is dead, the private sector is not doing anything, so we've got to step in and we've got to be the ones to be creative. And he was successful. And so politicians need to understand this as well and use the government itself as examples of innovation, as examples of collaborative work, and I think that can help. And even they can use some of the public spaces that they control as places that might inspire somebody to be creative or understand some new technology.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Well, that was fantastic. I've got to say, I love the bait bags. My wife is Nova Scotian, and I lived there for a while. But I was just thinking of your comment about the internet and its capacities. And in the mid 1990s, I was having lunch with Jim Balsillie of Research in Motion, then BlackBerry. I was a dean of a business school, and he was on my advisory board. And I said to him, well, you know, what's after the internet? And he sort of didn't look up from his salad and said, the internet. I said, no, but after the internet, it's the internet. And I said, but Jim, what's the next? He looked up, he looked at me and he said, it's the internet, to your point. Anyway, that was fantastic, and we have a brilliant, innovative new idea contained in this gift for you, Norm, and we want to thank you very much and wish you the very best.